Hey guys.
Hi everybody, I'm Caitlin Goldfinch.
I'm Hannah Hembry-Bell.
And we are Law Moms Out Loud. We help law moms grow as moms, lawyers, and people.
And normally we come in dancing to our song. And instead what Katie and I just did is hold hands and say, deep breath, full self, real self to this conversation. Because normally we're here to laugh and have fun. And I'm not saying we won't laugh and we won't have fun, but we're real serious today. We had a serious concept, a serious topic to discuss with our guest, who's Amy Lambert. She is a local Austin lawyer mama and very good friend of mine and Kate's. And she was going to share with us, and is going to, about her journey to have a baby and the struggle that she went through in that road. And I know that for so many of the law mom community, this is a really real, at your core topic that a lot of us have in common, but I don't think it's fully out there to discuss. So we're going to do that. We have been scrambling this morning because the Supreme Court of the United States issued a very significant opinion today. We've been waiting. There was a leak. It's this opinion called Dobbs. And we can't not talk about that today. I think we can just stop for a second and explain in general the trepidation we bring to this. I'm going to be honest. I'll go first. So it's difficult for me to get on here on a live thing in the world and talk about abortion, talk about what I really feel and think about abortion laws, the government, opinions, other people's opinions, both like colloquial, but also legal. I have a tightness in my chest. I feel hot all over and like I could kind of throw up.
I can feel your heat.
Yep, the heat coming off of me.
She's a little heater right now.
Yeah, I'll explain more about that in a minute and why. I'm from East Texas. And if I posted on my own personal Facebook page, inviting people that I've known and grown up with, who will probably be surprised to hear what I will say today. I have not felt comfortable speaking in this space, but this opinion happened today and I'm done with that.
I was telling some friends earlier today, it's a really curious thing to feel simultaneously sad and furious. I don't normally carry those two emotions at the same time. I have no confusion about my stance on abortion. It has been the same my entire life. And I believe that women have a right to choose what happens with their body. And what happened with this decision today is that the Supreme Court decided that state lawmakers have a bigger right to decide what happens with women's bodies than the women themselves. And that makes me feel today devastated, sad. I feel like crying. And I can also feel this fury like rising up in me. And I want to channel it. I want to talk to you guys about how we're going to channel this. Obviously, it all comes down to the vote. At the end of the day, that's what we got to do. But in the meantime, what are all the little thises and that's? We can talk about it here. We can post about it. We can march. We can call people. I mean, all of those little things, I think, will help us channel these emotions. And that's where I am.
Amy, where are you?
I'm in between both of y'all. I've been unequivocal in my compass of women's right to choose my whole life. I also grew up in a really conservative religious background and have a lot of dear, precious family members to me who feel just as passionately on the other side of the coin that I've never had this conversation with. And I'm 48 years old today, not today, a few weeks ago, but now. And it's, I'm not going to shy away from this conversation anymore just because I don't want to step on loved ones' toes. I am concerned about this choice. I am concerned about other protections that we have that I fear are going to be stripped down the line. I'm concerned about all of it, and I am furious, but I am also activated, and I'm not going to let my sadness or my fury stand in the way of my action.
Well, and I think if everybody watching or watching this later, or us, if we could all, I suggest we take 1 second. I want to all breathe together to bring our true voice to this conversation. I'm speaking to myself because I'm willing to say some stuff here that I've never said before out loud, except sort of whispered. That makes me hot all over. But I think that's what we're committed to with Law Moms Out Loud, is showing up as our authentic selves. And there's nothing more I can do than give my authentic voice to this circumstance. So can we all just take a second, everybody, even close your eyes, and we're going to breathe one big breathe up for 4 and hold for 4 and down for 4. Okay, ready? I'm going to lead us. Ready? I'm going to breathe in. Ready? Hold, 2, 3, 4, out. Okay. So I'm going to take a second to do my best to take us a little bit down a con law lane, because some people look, they may be saying Supreme Court issues an opinion. So what do I care? All right. Now, this is emphasis because, episodes are different. Are we focused on law, ma, or person? Today, it really is all three. But we got to put back on our legal hat for just a minute and be a little bit more lawyer than often we have to do. Because you become a lawyer and you just do stuff all day. You don't have to dive back into the Constitution on an everyday basis. So for people watching who are like, why do I care? Why do I care about this opinion? That's in DC, right? But I live in Texas, Rhode Island, Florida, California. How is this going to impact me? Now, to be fair, I texted with the smartest lawyer that I know, whose name is Drew Bell and is my husband, to make sure that I had the right grasp on this. And if I have to, I can just literally read what he said. But generally speaking, the way that the Constitution has all these different amendments, right? And each one of those amendments is interpreted by the Supreme Court to different laws are sort of held up against these amendments. Think of them like core values of our country, right? We have these core values, and then laws come up, and the Supreme Court, they eventually, they start at the state, they flitter all the way up. They don't really flitter. They are driven very difficultly to the Supreme Court. And you got these people who are sitting up there deciding, is this law jive with our core values as a country, this Constitution, right? And we all know about the First Amendment, right to freedom of speech, right? So that one we can all, does this law violate our core value as a country to the free speech? Mm-hmm. All right. This whole area is a little bit wonky. It doesn't just say the right to have an abortion, the right to be married to someone of the same biological sex, these are not written out in the Constitution.
I think I read somewhere that women are not even mentioned once in the Constitution.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. Yes. But we're supposed to read in women with the men. Okay. So yes, but the 14th Amendment becomes important here. And this dates back to, I guess it was in the 50s with a contraception case in Connecticut. I think Drew was reminding me, where for contraception wasn't allowed. It was illegal. Okay. In different places. And so the Supreme Court considered this law in Griswold, whether that law could stand up. Can a state outlaw the use of contraception? Supreme Court says, let's look at our core values. Okay, let's look at the Constitution. And within the 14th Amendment, they found, which is the due process, they found this substantive due process thing, the right to privacy. And so substantive due process, what is that? Good question. It's very confusing, but it's within there that the Supreme Court for years and years and years have found these privacy rights that now a lot of us take for granted, right? The right to use contraception. All right, women. All right. So if you think you don't agree with substantive due process and the right to privacy, hand me your IUD. Well, actually, don't hand me that, but you know what I'm saying? Hand me your birth control. Okay. So it's within that 14th Amendment and the right to privacy that these laws came up. The ability to, expanded from there, laws that outlawed sodomy were struck down under this same area. Roe versus Wade, the Casey case that came after that. All of those arose in substantive due process and an individual's right to privacy. All right, that's a very chopped up, not great way to explain it. But
I think it's great. Very impressed.
But within that, Obergefell, right? Gay marriage came in this same line, that we have autonomy, privacy within our own body and our own homes to do certain things. Now, there isn't a right to abortion, but the court for years since Roe, since the 70s, I think, has recognized a woman's right to be able to choose whether or not she carries a child to full term and has to get an abortion. And so the way that this works is, it's not like the Supreme Court issues laws that then say, okay, now you can't get an abortion in Texas or whatever. They issue an opinion that says, hey, we're no longer going to strike down as unconstitutional against the core values of the U.S. laws that prohibit women from getting abortions. So what that means is sort of this limit, this cap on what states can do is off. And the states can do what they want in this area. I mean, I'm sure with some outer limit, but we have no idea what that would even be at this point. So what this means for you is the safeguard of Roe, Casey, this whole line of cases that protected women's ability to make just these decisions about their body is gone. So what that means, and this should chill you to your bone, is that we are now dependent upon lawmakers in the various states, these to make whatever laws they kind of want about this particular area. Now, so say abortion, you're like, I don't kill babies. Sorry, you ladies, you witches can get on. Okay. But maybe you like your contraception. Maybe you're a fan of the fact that your cousin is married to his husband and they're a great couple. These other areas where the right to privacy and substantive due process has protected fundamental liberties to people in this country are now at jeopardy. They're in jeopardy. The opinion, and look, it's 200 something pages. I'm gonna be honest. I have not, we got over here, to get ready and have not read all of it, but I've read pieces and parts, and we've read through the syllabus, which is like the summary thing at the beginning. It invites attacks, y'all, to this other stuff. So say part of you, if any of my friends from East Texas or whatever, y'all are watching this, and you're like, all right, I don't want to kill babies anyway. That's your perspective. But you appreciate the ability to take your birth control and not have babies when you don't want to. You appreciate that people can sleep with, I don't give a hoot who anybody's sleeping with except me and my own husband, right? I mean, that's my philosophy on that. And I bet you most of y'all agree with that sort of thing. I think that the tenor of the country supports contraception, people marrying who they want, etc. So what this opinion means for all of us is that now your state gets to decide how far a woman's right to control her body goes, at least in this area. A. B. What it does is it invites more attacks to those rights to privacy that you wouldn't even think of as private, but that you hold as just inalienable, right? Like, of course I can go to the OBG and get my I don't even remember what a name of birth control is called. Those little, whatever, pills. The other thing that's real chilly and scary, and as lawyers, I think sometimes we lose sight of this because, and I'm speaking to lawyers on this one, right? Because this is a concept we learn about, and we hold as fundamental, this idea of stare decisis. It looks like stare, S-T-A-R-E, decisis, D-E-C-I, whatever, some Latin word. And that's this notion that we all rely upon, that things will be as they have been, that the court will respect the opinions that happened before. And the courts are supposed to, and have, generally speaking, historically, held to prior opinions of prior courts. That way, with some regularity, we can make life decisions. Because if we didn't have stare decisis as a concept in this country, then each new court that came in could just change every law. You'd never know what laws could be applied. You may not realize this, everybody, but this is what makes you feel like you're an American. This is what makes you feel like you can rely on your government to be reliable, predictable, and fair. Even if you don't always like what everybody says. You may not always like what everybody's going to do, but you can rely on consistency in the United States of America. This is what differentiates us, to me. Mm-hmm. And today they said, that thing we've been doing all this time, yeah, we're not going to be doing that anymore. That's what this opinion means to you. This is why you should care. Men, women, pregnant, not pregnant, give a crap about abortion, think abortion's killing babies, whatever. Even if we can't get your attention on that, we should get your attention on the rest. And so that's, generally speaking, best I know how to explain this. And sorry, Drew, if I totally butchered what you helped me think through. But the part I'm going to share, while I'm in heat anyway, is where I come to on this, because I think I live in Austin now. And I think, generally speaking, you'll hear the way people talk about this, a woman's right to choose versus pro-life, right? Pro-life, pro-choice. And I'm talking to my blue sisters and my red sisters and brothers of all kinds, for that matter, that I think there's room in this conversation, and I'm going to request it of everyone, to have some space for people doing the best they can to figure this out the best they can. And I'm going to share for me, because I don't come at this woman's right to choose only. I grew up in East Texas and Van, Texas. Holla for anybody who's watching. Go Vandals. And I went to law school at like 30-ish or something like that. And I went to law school very, very Republican. I could never vote for someone who votes to kill babies. This was my perspective. I believed that all abortions are killing babies, that they are babies at conception. And even I would have said, I'm sure back then, that a pill that undoes that is murder. That's what I legitimately thought. Now, I don't think that way anymore, and I'll be happy to share what I think now. But those of you who know me personally would know I'm a thoughtful, careful, kind, compassionate, open-minded person. I still thought that back then, y'all. And it's thanks to women and men and professors at St. Mary's in my life who helped me process and think through and read all of the abortion cases from around the world in the international con law class that I took, to start to chip away at that idea. And those of us who now are very ready to march, I just ask you to have a little bit of grace and compassion for people who aren't there yet. Because if people didn't do that for me, like Megan McEwen, one of my best friends, had the patience to kind of roll her eyes and explain to me why that idea didn't really suit me anymore. And it was a limiting belief that I had, based a lot on where I grew up and everything. So may we have some compassion and some space to understand for people who think differently than us. Because if people hadn't done that for me, I wouldn't be having this conversation. Y'all wouldn't even be my friend about this, right? So I just bring that humbly to this conversation so that we have some room. Now, We can get righteous and we can have all those things, but it's not that people who think differently than the way we may think now, they're not a bunch of idiots. Okay. They're not stupid. It's a different way of thinking that I now think is incorrect, but let's give a little room for people to change their mind. No one changes their mind when you're screaming at them.
Yeah, it's true.
No one comes across the aisle when you're telling them how wrong they are. You know what they do? When you calmly and with compassion and attention listen and hear to understand, not to speak, and help explain your perspective, they may change their mind. So yes, we can vote. We are people of action. We're women of action. Let me get something done. My challenge would be, it's not that easy. Real change as far as, I mean, we have to vote. That's Kate's department. Get out, rock the vote, march the streets, whatever.
I'll be marching.
Yeah. And I'm not saying I won't march, right? But I think that the other part of this conversation is conversation and being willing and open to come with an open hand to help change minds so that they'll go vote.
Mm-hmm.
Because look, holler, that ain't going to change a mind.
So I want to take a minute because we're getting lots of comments.
Okay, yeah. Hey,
thank you guys for all being here. Hannah, that was like, can we just give Hannah a round of applause? I mean, Con Law 101, check done. You guys now have attended a full semester of constitutional law.
Sorry, if Professor Aarons watches this, he's going to be like, oh my God.
No, he would be so proud.
I taught you nothing.
He would be so proud. I honestly, yes, that was very well done.
Oh, thank you.
It was really, really good. Okay, so Julia's here. Women's lives matter. We are pissed. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the thing to keep in mind, this is not an abortion debate, because I think there are a lot of pro women's rights people who don't, love the idea of abortion, right? You don't have to like the idea of abortion. What it comes down to is who gets to decide what a woman does with her body. That's the question. Lissy says, I'm so clear, there we go, that the government has no place in the OBGYN's office. And Julia, really liked your clarification, Hannah. Amy, hi, Amy, thanks for being here. I'm wondering if in Texas we can rely on the constitutional right in the Texas Constitution of privacy. That's where the next fight may go.
That's our smart lawyer friend getting into the procedural. Let's put a pin in that.
Yeah, like Lindsay. Hey, Lindsay. Thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing your honest journey. It is really powerful and helpful, and it has helped me to have these conversations with you. It brings me a whole lot more compassion because that fury part of me honestly doesn't really want to have the conversation with anybody on the other side. Like, I've got friends on Facebook who are like, okay, if you're celebrating today, just go ahead and unfriend me. And
that's easier.
I feel that sentiment, and that doesn't
it's like
move the needle. I mean, we got to vote. But if we're talking about having the conversation, Amy, we got to give you some time to talk after this. So Lindsay says, I completely agree. We need to create more spaces where we can grapple with these issues genuinely and from wherever we stand currently. Whitney, hey, Whitney, as someone who has severe fertility issues and had to make a heartbreaking choice to terminate just last year for my own health and safety, this overturn terrifies me on a whole new level. I feel you, Whitney. Thank you all for covering this issue and opening the dialogue. Lissy, I can totally understand the opposition to abortion. I just don't think the government gets to decide. There we go. And then we got some applause from Joy, and thank you from Jojo. Hey, Jojo. So
I think, okay, I got to say this. Because for those of us who are newer to the words and concepts of a woman's right to choose and bodily autonomy and all that, I'll just say, maybe you can join me in this very careful threading of the needle. Personally, I've had 4 children. I know what it's like to carry babies, 4 of them, from beginning to end. I know what it's like to feel flitters of feet. I know what it's like to know 5-6 weeks in that you're pregnant because you start to throw up and feel like crap. I've done it 4 times. It takes all you've got and then some to bring a child forth from like literally from nothing, from air. Women's bodies use everything they've got to craft and create an entire human being that gets infused with spirit, however that happens, grows fingers, grows cells that will create more babies someday. All right. I find that incredible. And I think we take it for granted a lot that we do this. Personally, would I have an abortion, or have I? I don't think so. I've not been in a situation to need to make that choice. For me, I find the idea of babies in wombs, laid on in tummies, not continuing, it makes me feel like I might throw up. That's how I truly feel. But the decisions I would make for me are mine to make. I do not believe it is the government's place to tell us that we must bring the cells forth from nothingness and create entire human beings that we will carry the burden of forever, regardless if you give them up for adoption and all of these things. That lives with you forever. And I think people on the other side of this idea act like women love, like that the like liberals, women are just like in love with getting abortions. Sign us up. It's no big deal. Just go get an abortion at the vending machine. I've never once talked to a woman or heard her speak about an abortion like it was no big deal. I've never once encountered a woman who didn't take this dead serious. We are serious. They want to make us hysterical and loud and obnoxious because that's easier to take down, but we're dead serious. We take our privilege and responsibility to, like, I don't know, keep the species going real serious. And there's, I think, a place where maybe you wouldn't have an abortion and maybe you don't love the idea of 30-week babies no longer existing. That's not easy for me to even talk about. But maybe there's a space where you can say, even if I don't love that for me, I don't think the government should come in and force people to have and house and grow babies. So if there's a part of you that isn't quite sure how to do this, that's how I've done it. And I think there's room. I think there's room to support governments minding their own gosh dang business on this. That's what I think.
That's the East Texas perspective. That's great.
Yeah.
So I think we should talk a little bit about what this means. We're in Texas. We're all the three of us are in Texas. But this is what this is going to bring forth, this decision. We've got immediate impact in Texas. The legislature already passed a trigger law that said if Roe is overruled, abortions are banned in Texas. So that's going to be in place within weeks. Women's clinics, all of that gone. There are 13 states in that same situation. So in 13 of the 50 states, abortion after today's
like illegal.
Decision,
like can't go to the doctor and get it. Like it's not, and there'll be other draconian things, right? Like, and if you do, then this. Tell about the
doctors can face life in prison and $100,000 fines if they conduct abortions in Texas. And so we'll start to see laws in place where a 14-year-old girl can get raped and impregnated and cannot access abortion. And that's a reality. That's not just some, so far-fetched possibility. So that's what we're dealing with. And Amy, we have not given you the microphone yet today. And Amy is just so well respected and loved in the Austin community as a lawyer, as a mediator, and has had her own journey, powerful, strong, difficult journey on the other side of this coin. And so, Amy, why don't we just turn it over to you? Tell us a little bit about you, your background, how this decision applies in the infertility IVF realm.
Sure thing. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me today. You guys are both dear friends, and I was excited to talk about infertility and how we can all help each other on that journey. You know, we're here today for a reason to have this topic, and they overlap a little bit. And so a little bit about myself. I practice predominantly in the area of family law, but my practice is a little bit niche. I don't litigate anymore. I do a lot of collaborative divorce, do a lot of mediation. I do a lot of assisted reproduction. So assisting folks with building their family through a gestational surrogate or an embryo donation or egg donation or sperm donation, assisting same-sex families in building their family through reciprocal IVF. So I do a lot of this in my practice as well. I've also am a personal consumer of assisted reproduction in that my husband and I went through fertility issues for a long, long time, 7 years. And we can go into the details of that if y'all want. I'm happy to walk you through my journey. But long story short, it ended up with about 10 IVF transfers. Prior to that, 5 IUI transfers. I had 4 miscarriages, 1 ectopic, and now I have an 8-year-old who is, you know, a spitfire. It was a long, long journey. This decision impacts folks that are going to be on that journey too, and we can get into that a little bit about how the law, like particularly these laws that states that have trigger laws, which under my reading of it this morning is 20 states. So that's like 25.5 million of reproductive age that all have trigger laws. So there will be complete or total bans on abortion in 20 states, you know, within weeks here.
And Amy,
yeah.
Look, I'm not being very good podcasty because I'm being interrupted. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't pause and explain what that, and I know I'm not trying to put you on the spot, so I'm happy to talk about it, but there's 20 states that will ban it. And what this means is that those of us who have money to get on planes, we can just drive or get on a plane and go to California. But, you know, there's a lot of stinking people who live here who can't drive or get on planes.
Or New Mexico.
Right. It's going to impact people who don't have money more. And then
absolutely
they're going to have more babies to raise.
Foster care system.
Foster care. Well, all the entire big picture. So I don't know if you want to say something there, but like, yeah, 20 states are going to ban it, but it's not going to ban it for a lot of us watching this show.
Absolutely. It's going to disproportionately affect people of lower income level, the people that grew up in poverty and are, you know, working 2 jobs just to pay their bills, or 3 jobs if you're living in Austin because the cost of living is so high here. And those folks that have no health insurance and don't have access to healthcare, or don't have access to healthcare to even get contraception. And so despite them doing everything they can to not get pregnant, may end up with a very loved but unplanned child. And as you mentioned, that just has a cascading effect to generations of poverty, and you know, this is disproportionately affecting a population that's doesn't benefit by privilege.
Yes.
And further divides our classes. Absolutely. This is a class issue, and it absolutely is further dividing our classes. Earlier you mentioned about the other earlier line of cases that are also affected by due process. So Griswold, which was the right of a married person's right to get contraception, right? Not even a single person. Lawrence v. Texas, which was the right to engage in private and consensual acts. And then Obergefell, which is the right to the same-sex marriage. You know, we are not being Chicken Little here by worrying that these might be affected.
Also,
Justice Thomas. Oh, what?
Substantive for business owners, y'all should care, because the constitutional limit on punitive damages of the 10 times ratio from the State Farm case, of where if you do bad conduct and you have compensatory like damages for injuries, there's a constitutional principle in substantive due process that you can't receive more than 10 times comp damages for punitive damages. So if you're a business owner, you own a trucking company, Thomas J. Henry is coming for you. You're the people who should really care about this, because pop that cap right off. I mean, if they apply the law consistently, why would you keep punitive damages?
Absolutely. And you know, we have reason to believe that they are coming after these rights to privacy, because so there's in opinions, a lot of times there's a concurring opinion, which is where another justice who did not write the main opinion wants to give a high five and explain their own arguments. So there are concurring opinions in this opinion that came out today. And one of them is from Justice Clarence Thomas, who is a Black man married to a white woman. And in his concurring opinion, he specifically calls out, we should reconsider all this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, which is the right of married people to get contraception, including Obergefell, which is the right to engage in private consensual sexual acts, and Obergefell. So he's specifically calling out what is on their to-do list. That terrifies me. Mm-hmm. And so that terrifies me. All of this not only has consequences for our society, our children, all of it, it has consequences for those of us who want to build our families. And I don't know if you guys want to go into this now or at one point, but I do want to talk about like how these laws impact a couple who wants to conceive through IVF or can't conceive through other ways and wants to conceive through IVF. Hannah, earlier you mentioned that, you know, there's a moment of conception, right? You talked about that moment, and that previously in your life, from that moment forward, that, you know, if it was conception, then it was no going back after that point. Well, while I think a lot of people talking loudly on this topic would like us to think that conception is a moment, it's just not a moment. Conception is, for even folks in that aren't having to use assisted reproduction, conception is not a moment. There is 2 weeks that the uterus builds the lining. Here we go for our biology lesson, right? Okay.
Yes.
So
biology, this is great.
Day 1, you start your period, right? That's your body shed. Day 1 of your cycle, you're shedding your previous month's body's preparation to receive an embryo. Okay. So then after your period ends, your uterus is building up that lining to receive an embryo in the coming weeks. So whenever we talk about timing of conception and how far along somebody is in a pregnancy, we are starting from day 1 of that cycle, when that's day 1 of their period. Okay. So when somebody says they're 6 weeks along and pregnant and after pregnancy, it's 4 weeks after they've ovulated, not 6 weeks after the conception has happened or the egg has met the sperm. So day 1, your period starts, you shed last month's cycle, and you start building the cycle. You're building your uterine lining for the next cycle. Approximately day 14, if your body's ovulating, if you're releasing eggs, which can be prevented through fertility issues, PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, or contraception, then your body releases an egg. That egg is viable and floats around in your fallopian tubes anywhere viable 24, 48 hours in that time period. Additionally, you could have had intercourse either before that time period or after that time period, because sperm don't immediately shoot in there and then die. They hang out for a little bit too, running around. And so if those 2 things happen to happen at the same time and happen to meet, then there can be that the sperm enters the egg.
I think, Amy, most of us think of conception. All I know about it, I mean, the actual like sperm egg part is off that. Look who's talking.
I was just thinking.
That's how I'm like, wait, that's not how they do it on there, Amy.
Yeah. Well, that's not it, because the sperm meets the egg out in the fallopian tube typically, or in the instance, if you have the unfortunate circumstance to end up with an ectopic pregnancy, that means they met in the fallopian tube and stay in the fallopian tube. But typically they meet, they get together, and then they float down into the uterus. Who knows how long that's going to take? A few days. And then they implant in the uterus if a pregnancy begins to start, okay? If that embryo begins to start. So then maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 days after that, your body might begin to produce the hormone that would show you that you might be pregnant. Okay, let's take this out of the body and into the laboratory for IVF real quick. With IVF, which is where you join an egg and a sperm in a laboratory setting. That's in vitro fertilization, and that happens in the laboratory setting. With women and couples who are going through IVF, we want to retrieve as many eggs as possible. So typically they've started 2 months prior in preparing their body and their hormones to generate as many eggs as possible so those eggs can be retrieved and combined with sperm, okay? This is in the laboratory setting. Barely 50% of those combined 2 cells will result in a viable embryo. About 50% of them just don't grow straight out of the gate. In the IVF setting, the embryologists, who are the doctors who have combined these cells, will watch the cell and this combination of cells for typically 3, 5, 6 days, typically 5 to 6 days, till the cell, the meeting of these cells grows to what's called the blastocyst stage. It may have 100 cells by that point. At that point, if the embryo has successfully grown, then sometimes if they're choosing to choose that cell, that group of cells will be transferred to a woman's uterus in the hope that it will implant, and a week or so later, her body will begin producing those hormones. Where this law or this ruling impacts IVF, and the ASRM, which is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, they issued a statement this morning.
Oh.
They're very concerned about this. Reproductive endocrinologists, who lay people call fertility doctors, they're concerned about this. Not concerned, alarmed. Because if the law now says, as Texas law, I believe, says, that life begins at conception and that's a finite moment in time, when is that finite moment?
It's probably in that lab, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
Is it in the lab? Is it in when the cluster of cells implants in the uterus? What if you have, you've retrieved 15 eggs and you end up with 9 embryos and 5 of them don't progress?
Right.
When did fertilization occur then? What can we do with that?
What if
and
you
so
do all 10?
Well, yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
You can't carry 10.
And so then can
Probably.
you discard them?
I bet not.
And go to jail?
We don't know. We don't know. You can donate them to other couples. That's a story for another day. My husband and I donated an embryo to another couple, and that's been a part of our journey too. It's magical.
Wait, just tell us
today.
Tell us for a minute about that. You
Okay.
donated your embryo to
Okay.
another couple, and what happened?
So we had our daughter, Catherine Lambert, and she was born at 25 weeks, which brings on all kinds of other feelings about viability and the issue of abortion and all of that in me personally, because I saw my daughter born at 25 weeks in one day, and she's now a rockin' 8-year-old, and I saw babies born at the same time of her at 23 weeks. So I am very sensitive and tender to the concept of viability. I'll set that aside for a second. But anyway, she was in the NICU for 6.5 months and had a very, very rough start, very rough first 2 years. And so we decided that we wanted to focus our resources on her needs and that we were not going to have any more children, which was not our plan for the previous 8 years, 10 years. It was not our plan. We had hoped to have more children, but we decided to focus our resources on her. So after a couple years, we started looking at, okay, we have these embryos left over, and what are we going to do with them? At the time, it was an option to have them donated to science, have them destroyed, or donate them to another couple. And I've heard since then, since I do assisted reproduction law, I'm hearing anecdotally from my clients that donating to science is no longer an option because science has more than they need. And some doctors, but not all, will now do what's called a compassionate transfer, which is where that embryo is transferred to the uterus at a time in which implantation is very, very unlikely to occur. So some doctors are not doing that. That's an invasive procedure, seemingly for the purpose of possibly getting around what our laws allow and people's comfort level, excuse me. But I've also heard anecdotally of someone becoming pregnant from a compassionate transfer. And that's scary as well. Anyway, we had leftover embryos. There was a previous iteration of a Facebook group for law moms called Law Mamas. And several women had posted on there that they were going through fertility and that they were seeking embryo donations. And so my husband and I talked about it, and excuse me, we had gone through some other groups to try and find a family that was the right fit for us. We wanted a family that our child would be able to know growing up, because this would be her biological siblings, and we wanted them to know each other. So anyway, somebody put together a spreadsheet in that group, and another mom who was looking for embryos reached out to me, and we talked to her and talked to her husband and met them, and ultimately decided to donate our embryos to them. And so that young lady, which we've called the Law Mama baby, is now 3 years old, about to be 4, I believe, in October. Birdie, my nickname for my daughter, Birdie, and I went to visit them in New Orleans in March and had a grand old time. And that was a scary journey, just as some of this other fertility stuff was really scary for me. Donating was really scary. I was like, am I going to feel like that's my baby? And I'm going to be watching somebody else raise my baby. I was really worried about that. Dave, my husband, was not worried in the least about that, but I was worried about it. And I worried about that all through the decision-making process. My friend, I guess she's my baby mama now in New Orleans. I worried about that all the way through the pregnancy. And the second that child was born, that thought has never crossed my mind again since then. Like my body, my compass knows that's that baby's, that's her family. That's her mom. That's her dad. And so that relationship, we keep in touch with them all the time. We share pictures all the time. We talk frequently. That relationship has been one of the most rewarding ones of my life. Anyway, that's a different path and journey, but I am really concerned for women going down the same path that I have been on, and my clients. Is the change in this, is this ruling going to prohibit them from being able to have IVF? Is that going to be a thing too, so that assisted reproduction is no longer going to be an option in now 20 of these states? It's a scary thought for me. So,
well, and I think it's those kinds of ramifications that we are left to grapple with. Okay, us lawyers, and Amy and I do the same kind of law, right? We do help families, and we are often faced with laws that lawmakers make in Austin that maybe they didn't ask all of us how it's going to play out for real families, the way their language and things is drafted. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing that I'm just sitting here thinking through all of the various ramifications, like those embryologist doctors. Mm-hmm. They're the ones I would think of any of us who are probably throwing up right now.
Totally.
Like, what does this mean for all my job? I make these babies and, these cells, these embryos, and not all of them, it's never designed that all of them turn into exactly real live children, right?
Absolutely. And it is standard practice now and has been for years. I mean, this was even something that was happening when we did our IVF and our IVF transfers 9 years ago now, is that the women that are going through for the fertility process, the majority of them have had extreme experiences in sadness and miscarriage and not being successful to get pregnant on their own. And so the doctors very often do embryo testing on these embryos at like day 5. They pull one cell and then determine the DNA to determine, is there any inversions on this DNA? Are there any trisomies on this DNA? From one cell, they're able to do that without damaging the blastocyst, which is the clump of cells. And so they can prevent these women from experiencing, as I did, yet another miscarriage, or reduce the likelihood of, because they know that they're transferring a cluster of cells, a blastocyst, that is most likely to result in a successful pregnancy. And so, if we're not going to be able to create embryos, if we're not going to be able to do that testing, that's going to put women who have already struggled with the experience of fertility issues and the social stigma and the family stigma and the pain of, going to all the baby showers and all of that you experience. Or I would tell you, don't go to the baby showers, don't torture yourself that way. But all the pain that you go through and experience with fertility issues, so much of the time it's experienced silently because you do feel that you're in the minority. It just hits them over and over and over again if we're not going to be able to do this the way that it's done currently. I was reading some census information earlier about IVF, and currently in the United States, 2 out of 100 children are the result of IVF. So this is not, a very obscure, like 0.0001%. This affects a lot of families in our country.
Wow,
and so, yeah.
Well, and one thing I'm sitting here thinking about, the thread of this conversation, which I intended to ask you all about, how to be a good supportive friend to people experience, practical tips. And I'm not saying I don't want to hear that, but we may not have time. We may have to do another one, the original thing we were thinking about. But you know what brings us all together, women? What we all share, whether we choose to partake in it or not, is this internal, physical, spiritual connection to bring life forth.
Yeah.
And all of us sisters can relate to that. Mm-hmm. So while a lot of men, bless you all, have the conversation, seem to often be the loudest ones and the ones making the laws, right? A lot of them. May we all remember what connects us. We are the majority. There are more of us than there are of them. And we owe it to each other and that common connection to protect each other.
Yeah.
Right? Because it can be so us, them, what you think, what you don't think. Find the humanity, I think, everybody, in this thing that we all share. Like, I think we lose sight of that. Just talking about going to that part, us as women all know from the inside out, whether you've had children or not, right, something inherent in you knows from the inside out how significant and important this is. I don't know. I think we shouldn't lose sight of the connection. But what I think we should highlight, I can see a comment here from Heather. Heather, I want to address your point, Heather Fretch, about, she says, I understand we don't want to, we won't change hearts and minds by screaming at people, but being polite clearly is working. We're losing our rights at a terrifying pace. And I want to address this because please do not misunderstand me. I think there's a place for conversation up close. And we're doing this up close, in my opinion, softly and calmly with each other to leave room for minds to change. Internal, like I talk with my clients. What I'm going to talk to you about, we're going to say this here. We have maybe a different perspective when we're in front of the judge and when we're going out there. When we go out there, we got something else to say. I'm talking about amongst ourselves, amongst our people, our sisters, our moms, our dads, up close, that conversation. I think that's where minds are changed. They're not changed on the Facebook wall, right? I think in our remaining time together, in that vein, let's talk a little bit about what next. Right? We have a big problem. Even if you don't think you have an abortion problem, you got a contraception problem. You've got a punitive damages problem. I mean, I don't think you listed that because you've got all these other issues. What are we going to do about it?
Well, so much of it, I think, is about educating folks. We all learned these rights and the Constitution when 8th grade, 7th grade, sometime we were back there, and we just sort of sock it away and move on down the road. And I think there's so much that history can teach us. And if we don't keep educating ourselves, then we're just going to be voting on what the algorithms tell us to vote on, right? Like we have a duty as people in our country, no matter what your political beliefs are, we have a duty to find a objective, truthful source for news and journalism, whatever that looks like to you. We have a duty to educate ourselves on that. And we have a duty to be informed about who we're voting for. And I've been guilty of not doing that myself. I mean, I have been watching the January 6th hearings. I don't hardly know anybody else who has. I'm not watching them contemporaneous, like at the time. I'm, looking at it on YouTube at night. And what has struck me is that the evidence that's being presented and played is from President Trump's aides, President Trump's attorney general, President Trump's family. They're not putting Democrats up there to provide evidence. They weren't in the room, right? They weren't in the room. They're putting the people that were in the room up there to say, here's what happened. Here's what he said. Here's what he told them. And regardless of what party you are, I think everybody has a duty to listen to what his friends and allies are saying that was said in that room that day and about anything in the future. And so otherwise, you're just following the algorithm on Facebook or whatever your social media is.
I mean, so that's an educate. So, right, let's think in terms of steps. We're people of action, right? Law moms, we get things done, right? So education, that's a longer term solution.
Well, we have a lot of questions here about criminal impacts of these laws. What if people cross state lines? Are they going to be able to be charged? People, already charging women with manslaughter for abortions. And so I think, and this is also brand new to me. I mean, my head is swimming. I don't know if you guys have noticed that I'm just kind of quiet. I mean, I have had what for me feels like the protected little bubble privilege of growing up in Austin, and most of the people around me on this issue think like I do. And the thought of getting in there and having a real honest conversation with someone who believes that someone who chooses to have an abortion is a baby killer, for me, it just like a big old wall goes up. I still am in the place of, I don't know how to have that conversation. So that's what's going on with me, is like, because that's what we've been talking about. A lot of this is how do we actually make change just between us, just amongst us. And then there's this whole other that's like, that's what really matters, I think. But then there's this, okay, what are the steps? What are the changes? all of the elections matter. The local elections, the state legislative decisions are going to matter on this. The federal legislative decisions are going to matter on this. How is this going to impact the criminal laws? Like to the education point, there's a lot of data that we need, and there's going to be a lot of campaigns and actions. And that's what I'm committed to doing. The part about having the conversations with people who don't think like me, I'm new. I'm brand new.
Well, look, we all do it our own way, right? So I'm talking about the conversations. That's probably my way.
Mm-hmm.
My way to carefully, one at a time. But we need
now I'm getting hot.
The activists go in. And here's look, Annie's List, those ladies, follow them. They're going to be mounting the army.
Yeah, ACLU. Right. There's already just a ton of Google Docs going around. I'm sure there'll be marches and stuff this week.
Donating money to the people fighting the fight. I think there's the disproportionate, so for the lawyers in the House, right, the disproportionate impact that these state laws will have on persons of color, on various protected statuses, I don't know, whatever, multiples. That'll bring equal protection challenges, but it's still gonna be the same Supreme Court. So what that all comes back to, the way this can work, right? Federal senators and such can make federal laws within their, whatever you call it, powers, right? Their special law power. Legal. Oh God, their legal, whatever, legislative powers. So
special law power.
Yes, it goes down to who you're voting for Senate. Right. That's how laws can get made.
Right.
That can trump the state laws, but then I'll have a whole different set of things.
Exactly. That's where I'm going with it. Like if they pass a federal law, what would it say? And then how would it trump, blah, blah, blah. So
the other thing I think is obviously voting, right. Getting people registered to vote, listening to the people who do this work, right? Like there are experts in this area. Annie's List, ACLU, etc. I think there is the place to be loud and proud and make noise, and we will not go silently into that good night, right? There's that. So in case people feel like this, because I hear people talking about March and all this stuff, I get overwhelmed. Like, ooh, that's a lot, and that's big stuff. So I come at it from more, what can I do in a daily, right? But I think there's the big picture. Head on down to Austin and, show up at Ted Cruz's house or whatever. Who doesn't live he's in Houston, I think. Mm-hmm. With that little dog.
That poor little dog.
Maybe he'll go to Mexico.
Snowball or whatever.
He'll take off. But I think there's room for that. I think we don't really even know the full extent. Like Amy sharing with us about IVF, about what happens for people who can go to another state. Are we going to have nanny state? Are we going to have like the one law that people report, right? And Texas got away with it.
Right.
If you report someone getting the abortion, right? Like that thing is real scary. Sounds familiar. I think looking back of what history has taught us about when we have citizens telling on each other, right? Mm-hmm. For doing stuff the government says they shouldn't do, that should ring all the bells. But I sitting here thinking, I think this is an opportunity for us as sisters to remember what really connects us. At the end of the day, it's the womb that we have. And there's room for, I'm not trying to be exclusionary, okay? Just please don't hear me saying that. But that unity amongst us is power, ladies. And I'm sensing this notion of we should be taken real stinking seriously. And I'm on YouTube or something, so I'm talking nice. But we are serious. We are a serious force to be reckoned with. Don't let them trivialize us. When you hear someone saying that woman's being hysterical, she's being emotional, when they try to name us, to demean us, you stand up for your sister.
Men too.
Men
Like,
too. Yeah, God.
I mean, because we got a whole lot of us. We got all the women, and then we got a big old chunk of the men.
There are so many amazing men
and
on
I
our
want to
side.
invite the men, because I know a lot of men who support women and women's rights, and y'all feel like you're silent supporters. You don't have the words. You don't know what to say. This is the moment that we need you to stand up and speak out and stand with us, even if you don't have the right words. I've been struggling for words with this. This just feels so big and hard to find the words, but this is your moment today. Say something on Facebook about it. Let the women know that you are with us.
Or chime in too when you see them talking.
Yeah.
Chime in with support, right? I think, and I experienced this when the issue is so big. And I texted Kate and Amy and said, y'all gonna have to lead today. I don't know what to say. I'll ask, why don't you, I'll be the moderator. I'll ask y'all questions. And I was ready to hide in that, which is that we can't. And I feel that like on Facebook and in the various groups that we're a part of, a little bit afraid to say, because then what? And like, if you don't fully know all the answers, but I think if you hold space and say, look, I'm not trying to act like I have all the answers, but here's some things I do know, right? To speak, and show your support. I don't know that we have any. Yeah, go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
And Hannah, your story is so, your education on this issue is so powerful to me.
Yeah, me too.
Because you listened with an open heart and did a 180. And I think personally, that's what it's going to take. If we are just, protests, I think those are so important. So important. But I think we're also going to need to have microscopic individual touches and educating folks on here's why I started out feeling the way you are, and then here's what I learned, and here's what I feel now. That is so powerful because you've been in their same shoes. And I know that you've talked today about not necessarily feeling comfortable talking about this, but I think people like you who've been through that same education and transition are exactly the people who need to be talking the loudest. And to the audience that you were a part of for 30 years, Well,
and I appreciate you saying that, Amy. I think all my lefty loosey sisters can help with when somebody like me says something like that, responding like y'all have, instead of the woke Olympics, and give me a real hard time of how unwoke Olympic I am, which silences it. And look, extremes on either side, y'all, is not usually the right answer, right? Just because they're extreme you don't agree with, like, right, there's another extreme, and that doesn't make it right because it's your point of view. There are gradations in this that I think there are certain spaces where reasonable minds can disagree. And if you can keep that perspective where reasonable minds can disagree, leave room. That's what I try to do. Like, there are certain things to me, reasonable minds cannot disagree that the color of your skin impacts how you should be treated. Reasonable minds cannot disagree on that fact. So no, we have no room for that. But in this space, I think reasonable minds can disagree on pieces of it. So may we all have enough humility, because I was thinking about in that Hamilton song, dying is easy, living is harder. And screaming and hollering and going to a Saturday march. Okay. That don't cost you much. That feels good. It feels good to get mad. Righteous indignation is as old as Alexander Hamilton himself, right? That's the point. We are a nation built on righteous indignation.
Well, and we're a nation built on individualism too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not serving us. Individualism and thinking only about yourself is not serving us today. And while that is such a part of our country's DNA, and it is the DNA of Texas, to be sure, it's not serving us when this person's doing okay and this person's dying on the vine, for the person that's doing okay to be like, see you later. You know, it's not serving us.
Right.
Right. And it doesn't, listen, this is where I come to. Those of you listening, if it was your daughter, your sister, your wife, I'd imagine you'd think differently. Don't make it be your daughter, for you to get this point, right? Yeah. Don't be that. Don't invite that on yourself, because truth has a way of coming to you, to your front door. And I wish for all of us that we gain this experience intellectually, not otherwise. I just think that this notion of, well, for all them over there, it's got to be like this. Oh, but when it's me, that's different. Mm-hmm. That's how we are, right? That's how so many people are, that until it's personal to them, they don't give a hoot. This is personal. My whole point today is, even if you don't plan on having an abortion, or you hadn't had one, you ain't going to have one, your sister, nobody else going to have one, I bet you've benefited from contraception.
Yeah. And I bet you know someone who's had one and you don't know it.
Yeah. If you don't know someone who's had an abortion, it's because you're the sort of person they can't talk to about it. The numbers in this country, a lot of your lives work like they do because some woman was brave enough to make the hardest decision she's ever made in her life.
Yeah.
And you're built on her back. So take that to heart, is all I'm saying in this conversation. And may we continue to have it with grace and compassion inside when we're talking amongst ourselves. And may we give them hell when we look outside.
Well,
that's
it. That's it. We're done.
Amy, we need to do a deeper dive on the other stuff.
Absolutely. Whenever y'all want. Absolutely.
Maybe we'll do a separate sort of like recording thing. All right. I don't really want to do our gold stars. We're not doing gold stars. Literally, this conversation, moms, lawyers, people, having it is our gold star.
Yeah.
What's this?
I just wanted to put this one. We need Shania to just sing "Let's Go, Girls."
Yeah. There we go.
Let's go, girls.
Let's go, girl. Oh yeah, let's go. I wish if we were like a real podcast, we'd have cue the Shania. What's up? All right. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank y'all.
Bye. Bye.